The four-star walked into the dining facility and stopped looking for Marcus Webb the moment he saw him. He was sitting at a corner table with a bowl of soup and a glass of water, reading nothing, watching nothing, occupying the specific stillness of a man who has spent enough years in high-noise environments to have developed a deep and genuine appreciation for the absence of them. He looked like he had nowhere to be and nothing to prove, which was, in its way, the most accurate description of him that had ever existed. The four-star crossed the dining room in 12 steps. He did not acknowledge the rear admiral standing near the service line with a soup bowl in his hand and an expression that had been deteriorating steadily for the last 4 minutes. He did not acknowledge the security detail that had fanned out behind him, or the junior officers who had stopped eating to watch, or any of the ambient machinery of rank and protocol that governed every other interaction in every other room on this base. He stopped in front of the corner table. He put his hand out. Marcus looked up. He took the hand and shook it once, firmly, with the comfort of a man greeting someone he has known in circumstances that make formal titles beside the point. "Redeemer," the four-star said. It was not a greeting. It was not a title. It was the specific sound of a man saying the only word that accurately described what he was looking at. Hit that like button. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from tonight. Marcus had retired on a Thursday in late April, the least dramatic possible day for the least dramatic possible event in his career. No ceremony, no formal retirement parade, no remarks from the commanding officer, no shadow box with medals mounted behind glass. He filled out the paperwork, returned the gear that was returnable, signed the inventories for the gear that wasn't, and drove home in the same truck he had driven to the base. A 10-year-old dark blue Silverado with 200,000 miles and a broken armrest he had been meaning to fix for 3 years. He was 40 years old. He had spent the previous 22 years in service, the last 15 in a unit whose designation did not appear in public military records and whose operational history was compartmented at a level requiring 3 separate clearances to access. He had deployed 38 times. He had conducted missions in 17 countries across environments ranging from urban infrastructure to open desert to jungle terrain to maritime approaches, in roles ranging from ground assault to reconnaissance to, in the final 7 years, direct action mission commander for operations classified as deniable at the highest levels of the intelligence community. He had a call sign. In the Tier 1 community, call signs were not informal nicknames derived from embarrassing incidents. They were operational designations used in place of names in communications that could not afford names, and they accreted meaning over years in the way actual names never could. His was Redeemer, given to him after his 3rd deployment for reasons that were part of his operational record and therefore classified, and he had carried it for 12 years. He lived in coastal Virginia in a small house with a back porch that got afternoon sun and a kitchen he had repainted twice because the color mattered and the first 2 attempts hadn't been right. He cooked well. He read history. He ran 4 miles 3 mornings a week. He slept well. He was, in the precise meaning of the word, at peace. His neighbors thought he was some kind of analyst, something with the government. There was a general sense that whatever he had done involved classified clearances and long absences, and a deliberate vagueness when the subject came up. He was polite about it the way people with actual secrets are polite about them, not dramatically, not evasively, but with the comfortable ease of a man who has long since stopped thinking of it as a secret and simply thinks of it as information that belongs to a different context. The jacket was the one piece of the old life that had followed him into the new one without intent. He had grabbed it off a hook in the equipment room on his last day. The way you grab things that have become background furniture after enough years, not sentimental, not deliberate, just the automatic reach for a familiar object. It had been a working jacket for the last 4 years of his career, worn in planning rooms and on transport aircraft and in the cold mornings of various overwatch positions. The smell of aviation fuel and military-grade detergent had never entirely washed out. The patch had been given to him by his team commander at the end of his 3rd deployment. Not at a ceremony. There were no ceremonies in that unit's culture, because ceremonies required witnesses, and the unit did not solicit witnesses. Just handed to him across a planning room table with a nod and no particular speech. Marcus had sewn it on himself badly, which was why the stitching was uneven at the lower left corner. He never took it off. He never thought much about it. The call from the Chief of Naval Operations Office had come on a Monday morning while he was making coffee. His former CO, a man named Callahan, who had overseen the unit for the last 4 years of Marcus's career, and who communicated in the direct, unadorned manner of someone who had spent decades in environments where ambiguity cost lives, had delivered the information in 2 sentences. The CNO wants to see you Thursday at Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek. Something related to the coast operation. You'll want to be there. Marcus had said he'd be there. He drove to Little Creek on Thursday in the Silverado with the broken armrest, wearing a gray hoodie and clean jeans and a pair of boots that were well maintained but not new. He had a meeting with the CNO's staff at 1400. He had arrived at 11:45 because he arrived early for everything, which was a habit built by years of professional environments where being on time was defined as being 5 minutes late. The dining facility was operators only. Not aggressively signposted, the naval special warfare community didn't advertise itself, but the access controls were clear to anyone who understood what they were looking at. Marcus had presented his credentials at the gate. The credentials included a laminated ID that was not standard military issue, and that bore, in addition to his photograph and a unit code that would not resolve in any public database, a special access program code that designated his clearance level and operational history. The gate security had recognized the code and waved him through without comment. He had found the dining facility, requested a bowl of soup from a petty officer who had looked at his credentials and treated him with the precise professional respect of someone who understood what the code meant without knowing any of the specifics, and sat down at a corner table to wait. He had been sitting there for 22 minutes, eating soup and thinking about what to do with the back garden before winter, when the Rear Admiral walked in. Rear Admiral Daniel Webb was 41 years old, newly promoted to 08, and in possession of the specific confidence that very recent promotion to a senior rank produces in competitive men who have just received confirmation that the competition is going their way. He was not unqualified. He had served well. He had commanded at every level up through Commodore with consistent distinction, the combat deployments, the command tours, the staff time. The promotion was deserved. What the promotion had done was compress something in his personality that had always been present but previously modulated by the awareness that people above him could make his life difficult. Now there were fewer of them. And in the temporary period between achieving a significant promotion and the new level of accountability settling in, some men expanded in ways they would later have to contract. Webb was in that period. He came through the dining facility door with 2 staff officers and the straight-backed, surveying posture of a man who has recently acquired the authority to find things out of order and intends to use it. He swept the room. He saw the operators eating, the base staff, the petty officer at the service station. His gaze traveled to the corner table. He saw a black man in a gray hoodie eating soup. The assessment that followed was automatic and unexamined. He saw civilian clothes, no visible rank. A man who did not have the bearing, he told himself, of someone who belonged in an operators-only facility, by which he meant a man who was not carrying the specific performance of belonging that he associated with the people who should be there. What he was actually looking at was a man so secure in his belonging that performing it had never occurred to him. Webb crossed the room. "Excuse me." Marcus looked up from his soup. "This is a restricted facility," Webb said. His voice had the particular texture of authority being deployed as a first move rather than a last resort. "Operators and cleared personnel only. Can I ask who you are and why you're here?" Marcus looked at him with an expression that was not hostile, not deferential, not apologetic. It was simply present, the expression of a man registering information without yet deciding what to do with it. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced the ID card. He held it out. Webb took it. He looked at it. His eyes moved over the photograph, the unit code, the SAP designation. The SAP designation was a string of letters and numbers that meant something specific in the intelligence community, a clearance level and operational category. But Webb had spent his career on the SEAL side of naval special warfare, and his familiarity with the Tier 1 community's credentialing systems was, like his familiarity with many things about that community, present but incomplete. He saw what looked to him like a contractor badge with an elaborate code. He handed it back. "I don't recognize this designation," Webb said. "This facility requires active duty credentials or an approved visitor authorization from my office. Do you have either of those?" "That card is my authorization," Marcus said. His voice was even without edge, the voice of a man stating a fact that does not require advocacy. "That card," Webb said, "is not a format I recognize, and I am the senior officer in this facility. Who are you here to see?" "Chief of Naval Operations," Marcus said. Something moved through Webb's expression. It was a specific sequence. First, the instinctive recoil from an answer that sounds like overreach. Second, the rapid construction of an explanation that makes the answer fit the narrative he had already decided on. Third, the expression settling into the satisfied compression of a man who has resolved a cognitive problem by choosing the easier option. The easier option was, the man at the corner table was confused, misplaced, or both. People who were actually scheduled to meet with the CNO did not arrive in hoodies. People who had actual SAP clearances were known to the senior officer in the room. The card was likely a contractor access badge for a different facility, the kind that sometimes got recycled through the system and showed up in places where they didn't belong. Webb pulled out the chair across from Marcus and sat down, which was a dominance move dressed as a courtesy. "Listen," he said, with the deliberate patience of a man managing a situation he considers beneath him. "I don't know how you got past gate security, and I'm not interested in making this difficult. But you are in an area that requires specific authorization. Your credentials don't match any format this command uses, and claiming to have a meeting with a 4-star is," he paused, choosing the word carefully, "not something I'm in a position to take at face value." He picked up Marcus's soup bowl. "I'm going to need you to come with me to the security office while we sort out your clearance status. We'll get you a cup of coffee and you can leave the soup," Marcus said. Webb looked at the bowl in his hand. He looked at Marcus. He set the bowl down on the table beside him, not in front of Marcus. "I'm going to need you to stand up," Webb said. "I'd rather finish my lunch," Marcus said. The two staff officers standing behind Webb shifted slightly. One of them had the expression of a man who had just noticed something he couldn't name but found subtly concerning. The other was watching Marcus with the careful, neutral attention of someone who had learned that neutrality was the correct posture when the senior officer in the room was making a decision they hadn't been consulted on. "Stand up," Webb said. His voice had lost the deliberate patience. "Or I will have you physically removed and detained, and that will be considerably more disruptive to whatever it is you think you're doing here." Marcus looked at him for a moment, not a long moment, a single breath's worth of looking. Then he leaned back slightly in his chair and folded his hands on the table and waited. It was the waiting that was the thing. Not defiant waiting, not performative waiting. The waiting of a man with a long relationship with the interior of his own head, who has found that most situations, if given enough time, resolve themselves without requiring him to do anything. Webb was opening his mouth to speak to his staff when the main doors of the dining facility opened. Vice Admiral Hargrove, Chief of Naval Operations, 4 stars, the senior uniformed officer of the United States Navy, came through the door with his security detail and his aide and the specific presence of a man who has occupied the top position in one of the most powerful military branches in the world, long enough to have shed every instinct toward self-presentation and arrived at something simpler and more absolute. He came through the door and he looked across the room. He found Marcus in the corner in approximately 1 second. He crossed the room in 12 steps. He did not look at Webb. He did not acknowledge the staff, the other diners, the ambient protocol of the room. He stopped in front of the corner table and put his hand out. Marcus took it. They shook hands once, in the grip of men who have known each other in a context that makes titles and ranks feel like the wrong language for what actually exists between them. "Redeemer," Hargrove said. "Admiral," Marcus said. Hargrove pulled out the chair that Webb had vacated and sat down. He looked at the soup bowl sitting on the table beside Marcus rather than in front of him. He looked at it for a moment. He picked it up and set it back in front of Marcus with the calm, deliberate precision of a man restoring a small order. "Was there a problem with your lunch?" Hargrove said. "Minor administrative confusion," Marcus said. "Handled." Hargrove looked across the room at Webb, who had not moved and whose expression had been traveling through several stages of a very unpleasant internal journey for the last 45 seconds. The expression Hargrove turned on Webb was not hot anger. Hot anger, Webb could have managed. He had received dressing downs before, from senior officers, and understood the grammar of them. What Hargrove's face showed was colder and more precise than anger. It was the expression of a man doing an assessment, the way you assess terrain before committing to a route, noting features and hazards, and making decisions before speaking. "Admiral Webb," Hargrove said. "Sir," Webb said. His voice had shed every layer of authority and performance. What remained was the unadorned register of a man standing in a very small room. "Do you know who this man is?" "A beat." "I was in the process of determining that, sir, when—" "That is a yes or no question." Another beat. "No, sir." "Do you know what that card he showed you is?" Webb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I was unfamiliar with the designation, sir." Hargrove was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice did not change volume or register. It had the particular quality of a weapon that doesn't need to be loud because its precision does the work. "The designation on that card," Hargrove said, "is a special access program code that indicates a clearance level that you, as a Rear Admiral in Naval Special Warfare Command, do not have, which means the card he showed you correctly communicated that this man's authorization exceeds your ability to verify it, which should have been the end of your involvement." Webb said nothing. "This man," Hargrove continued, "is a retired Tier 1 direct action mission commander who spent 15 years conducting operations under this command's authority at a classification level that your service record does not include access to." He paused. "He is known in the community by the call sign Redeemer. If you have spent any time in the quiet rooms of this command, which your career record indicates you have, you will have heard that call sign referenced in mission briefings without being given a face or a file to attach it to." Something moved through Webb's expression. It was the specific movement that happens in a face when a piece of information arrives that retroactively reorders a significant amount of prior information. "He is on this base today," Hargrove said, "because he is here to receive the Medal of Honor in a private ceremony for a single-handed direct action rescue operation conducted in Coast Province 3 years ago that extracted a trapped 6-man reconnaissance element from an overrun position behind enemy lines. The operation is classified. The ceremony is classified. His presence on this base is classified." He looked at Webb with the expression of a man arriving at the part of a document where the conclusion is stated. "And you have spent the last several minutes attempting to have him detained." The dining facility was very quiet. Webb stood at something approaching attention, though he had not been ordered to. It was the posture his body had defaulted to without consulting him. "Sir," he said. "You made an assessment," Hargrove said. "The assessment was based on what the man was wearing rather than what he was carrying, which is exactly the kind of error that gets people killed in the environments where this man spent his career." He stood. "Go sit down, Admiral. Finish your lunch. And spend some time thinking about what you almost did to the most decorated operator in this building." Webb picked up his tray from the service area. He had not yet eaten, and sat down at the nearest table with the careful, deliberate movements of a man managing the aftermath of a significant event and choosing to manage it quietly. Hargrove sat back down across from Marcus. He signaled the petty officer at the service station, who appeared within 30 seconds with a fresh cup of coffee and a quiet expression that communicated professional discretion. "Your soup's cold," Hargrove said. It was lukewarm to begin with, Marcus said. Hargrove smiled. It was a brief, genuine smile, the kind that appears on the faces of serious men when they are briefly reminded that seriousness is a tool rather than a permanent state. The ceremony's at 1500. Callahan will be there. Rodriguez, Teller, the Coast team, all 6 of them. He looked at Marcus. They asked if they could attend when we told them what we were doing. All 6. Marcus nodded. He said nothing for a moment. They didn't have to do that, he said finally. No, Hargrove agreed. They didn't. Marcus picked up his soup and drank the last of it in 2 measured swallows. He set the bowl down. How's the Admiral going to be? Marcus said. Hargrove looked across the room at Webb, who was eating with the deliberate focus of a man who has decided that the best available action is to cause no further events. He'll be fine, Hargrove said. He's a good officer. He made a bad decision about what he was looking at. He looked back at Marcus. He's not the first. No, Marcus said. You could have told him. He had the card. He could have processed the card correctly if he'd wanted to. People usually make up their minds before they look at the evidence, Marcus said. The evidence becomes part of the case they've already built rather than data they're neutral about. He looked at his hands on the table for a moment. I've seen it in a lot of different rooms. Hargrove was quiet. How are you, actually? Marcus considered the question with the particular care of a man who has been asked it infrequently enough to take it seriously when it arrives. Good. I'm genuinely good. Virginia? Small place, good garden. I've been reading a lot. History? Mostly. Some philosophy. He paused. I've been thinking about teaching, not military, just the fundamentals. How to move, how to think, how to wait. He looked at Hargrove. There's a program at a veterans center in Norfolk. They work with post-service guys who are having trouble with the transition. I've talked to the director a couple of times. Hargrove looked at him. Teaching combat skills? Teaching attention, Marcus said. The combat skills are a vehicle. The attention is the thing. He considered. Most of the guys having trouble after service are having trouble because the structure that organized their attention went away and nobody gave them a new one. Combat skills have the structure built in. You can use them to teach attention without it being about fighting. Hargrove sat with this for a moment. That would be a significant thing. Might be, Marcus said. I haven't decided yet. They sat for a few more minutes in the companionable quiet of men who have known each other long enough that silence carries content. The dining facility had returned to its normal rhythm around them. Trays, conversation, the specific low-level hum of a meal service facility between rushes. At the table across the room, Webb ate his lunch. He ate it without speaking to his staff. He ate with the deliberate present focus of a man who has decided that the most dignified available response to a situation is to execute the next mundane task with complete attention. He was thinking about the card, about the way it had felt in his hand. A laminated rectangle with a photograph and a string of alphanumeric characters that he had looked at and decided in approximately 3 seconds did not mean what it was saying. He was thinking about the 3 seconds. He had spent 15 years making rapid decisions about incomplete information in conditions where the cost of being wrong was not administrative but terminal. He had been, by every measure he respected, good at it. He had looked at a man in a hoodie and made a 3-second assessment that was wrong in the most consequential possible direction. He thought about what Hargrove had said. The assessment was based on what the man was wearing rather than what he was carrying. He turned it over. He understood it in the particular way you understand something when it comes packaged with the knowledge that it has already cost you something, which was always the most durable kind. Once, briefly, he looked across the room at the corner table. Marcus did not look back. He was simply sitting with Hargrove, present and unhurried, like a man who has been in enough difficult places to understand that a clean table and a warm meal and an afternoon with nowhere urgent to be was not nothing. It was, in fact, quite a lot. The ceremony was at 1500 in a room that had no windows. 6 men stood against the back wall, the coast team, all 6 of them, in dress uniforms. Rodriguez, who had been the team leader, stood at the far left. Teller was beside him. The other 4 were arrayed in the order they had occupied in the file during the extraction, not something anyone had planned, but something that emerged naturally from the muscle memory of men who had moved in that configuration in the dark in the worst moment of their lives. Marcus stood at the front of the room facing the CNO, who held the citation and the case. He had changed into his dress uniform for the ceremony. It had taken him 11 minutes to locate it in the closet where it had been hanging, unworn, for 14 months. It still fit. He had stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a moment before leaving, looking at himself the way he sometimes looked at old photographs, with the mild, interested distance of a man examining documentation of someone he used to know. The citation was classified. The room was classified. There were 9 people present, and what happened between them in the next 40 minutes would not appear in any record that would ever be publicly accessible. What happened was simple. A man received formal acknowledgement from the institution he had served for 22 years, in a room with no windows, in the presence of 6 men whose lives were the concrete evidence of what the acknowledgement was for. Marcus stood at attention while the citation was read. He looked straight ahead. His expression was the same as in the dining facility, present, uncomplicated, unhurried. Rodriguez, from his position at the back wall, was looking at Marcus with an expression that would have been difficult to describe in professional terms, but was in human terms entirely legible. It was the expression of a man looking at someone who was, in the most literal and least metaphorical sense, the reason he was in that room rather than the alternative. 3 years had passed since Coast. Rodriguez had not slept a full night in the first 6 months after it. The specific shape of what Marcus had done, the geometry of it, the decision to go back in, the fact that he had gone back in alone because there was no time to wait for support, and the geometry of the position made a single actor more viable than a team, had lived in Rodriguez's understanding of the world as an event so singular that he had stopped trying to describe it to people who weren't there and had simply carried it as a private weight. He looked at Marcus receiving the medal, and something in the weight changed, not lighter, completed. When the medal was pinned, Hargrove stepped back. He looked at Marcus for a moment without speaking. Then he shook his hand once, the same grip as before, the grip of men who have known each other in contexts that make ceremony feel like a translation of something that already happened in a more fundamental language. The 6 men at the back wall came forward one at a time, Rodriguez first, then Teller, then the others. Each of them shook Marcus's hand. None of them said anything significant. What they said was things like, "Good to see you," and "looking well." And what they meant was something that does not have a word in the English language but exists as a recognized state between men who have been in the same place at the same moment when the alternative to surviving was the other thing. He drove home at 17:30, the medal in its case on the passenger seat, the Silverado climbing the highway north. He was thinking about the Veterans Center. The director, a woman named Priscilla who had served 2 tours as an Army intelligence officer and who ran the program with the efficient, no-sentiment practicality of someone who had been disappointed by enough well-meaning but underprepared instructors to have developed excellent instincts about the difference, had given him a standing offer. "Come whenever you're ready," she had said. "We'll figure out what it looks like." He had been almost ready for several months. The ceremony today had completed something, he thought. Not closed it, that was the wrong word. The thing didn't close. It was always going to be part of what he carried, but completed it, in the sense that a sentence is completed by a period, not ended, concluded. The meaning had been stated and the grammar acknowledged. He could begin something else now. He was thinking about how to structure a first session, not what to teach exactly, but what to ask. The first questions were always more important than the first instruction. What is the hardest room you've been in since you came home? Where do you go in your head when you can't get out of it? What were you paying attention to when things were working, and what happened to that attention when things stopped? The highway opened up north of the city, and the traffic thinned, and he drove in the quiet dark with the metal in its case on the seat beside him, and thought about attention, and rooms, and what it cost to be quiet in a noisy world and what it gave back. He thought about Webb. Not with anger, not with contempt. Webb had done what people did, looked at the surface information and made a rapid decision and committed to it with the authority at his disposal. He would learn from it. Most people did when the lesson arrived clearly enough. The ones who didn't learn were the ones who found a way to make the lesson about something other than what it was actually about. He thought the Admiral would learn. He thought he had seen it beginning in the room, in the particular quality of how he had sat down and stayed sat, not the performance of contrition, but something quieter and more interior. The beginning of a man revising something he hadn't known needed revising. That was the thing about humility. It almost never arrived as something you chose. It arrived as something that happened to you, and what mattered was what you did with it after. He pulled off the highway onto the county road, 5 miles to the house. The trees were dark on both sides. He had a garden to think about, beds to turn before the frost. A dog who would meet him at the door with the same open, uncomplicated joy he always did, entirely indifferent to medals and clearances and call signs and the specific wait of the afternoon. Marcus drove through the dark toward home. He was already almost there. The quietest operators Marcus had known shared one characteristic that had nothing to do with skill, and everything to do with what happened after skill was no longer the main thing. They had learned to put it down. Not permanently, not with denial or suppression or the particular kind of deliberate forgetting that does more damage than memory, but with the practiced ease of a man who carries something heavy all day and has developed the specific knowledge that setting it down in the evening is not weakness and picking it back up in the morning is not failure. They had learned to be nobody in the rooms where it didn't matter, invisible in the grocery store, unremarkable at the farmer's market. The kind of man nobody looks at twice. This was not a disguise. It was not performance. It was the most honest version of who they were, men shaped by extraordinary experience who had chosen, deliberately and with full knowledge of what they were choosing, to live in the ordinary world as ordinary things. The meal in the restricted dining facility had been soup. It had been lukewarm soup at a corner table in a room Marcus had no personal attachment to, and the most significant thing that had happened there was an admiral who was going to be significantly different next week from what he had been this morning. Marcus would not remember the soup. He would remember the 6 men standing at the back wall with their dress uniforms and their irreversible gratitude. That was the only thing that needed to be remembered. Everything else was just noise around a very quiet center. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you're here for stories about the kind of people who carry the most and say the least. Leave a comment. Have you ever been in a room where you knew something that nobody else knew? Tell us what it felt like.